The Florida Panthers are in the Fortress for the first time since losing Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. Can they get their first win in Vegas on their ninth attempt?
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, January 4th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're to your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News, and you follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. So the Florida Panthers, we discussed more of this on yesterday's show and today, and the great start once again for the Cats in getting that big road victory, a dominant road victory in Tempe, Arizona against the Arizona Coyotes, and big opportunity for the Florida Panthers to continue. But it's not going to be easy as they return to Vegas for the first time since Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. And here to discuss tonight's matchup and the season that has been for the Vegas Golden Knights, he is my fellow colleague from the Hockey News Las Vegas, Paul Delos Santos. Paul, welcome to Locked On Panthers, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Excited for you to be here as well. And I want to take a moment really because it's still very fresh in all of our minds. The Winter Classic what's really funny is the Vegas Golden Knights play in T-Mobile Arena, and then they played a Winter Classic, which was an away game at T-Mobile Park, another place that had the same name. So, but of course, two of the most recent expansion franchises. Now with the Vegas Golden Knights winning the cup and all, it's Vegas is a when it comes to brand recognition now, it's more recognized now ever since they've came into the league, now winning a cup and now getting the experience of a Winter Classic, an outdoor game. They're second technically because of Lake Tahoe, what happened a few years ago. But from your perspective, how much of a success did you think that Winter Classic was, even though they were on the road?
I think it was a success for just in general for the two expansion teams. I think it was just something that, we get these various venues across the East Coast, which are more historic than the ones on the West Coast for the most part. But getting one on the West Coast, and especially T-Mobile Park, is a big achievement. And they really highlighted how much Seattle has grown as a hockey market. I think that's the biggest thing that we can walk away from this Winter Classic, is that Seattle is this accepted the Kraken as something that's really a big part of their identity, and the Golden Knights just happen to be a part of it. I think it was more about, I think it's a bigger deal for the Kraken in terms of like how it affects the bigger scheme of things and how it affected the Winter Classic. But Vegas walked in with the mindset like, this is not one out of 82 games. This is a special moment, and let's enjoy the moment and let's play a hockey game at the end of it. So they really looked at it from that perspective, that it was one of those just unique experiences that they're going to Bruce Cassidy said they're going to walk away from a week later. They're not going to remember the game. They're going to remember the experience of skating with their family at the family skate. They're going to remember playing outdoors. They're going to remember all the other extracurriculars that went on. And the game itself, I mean, it wasn't Vegas's best performance. I mean, they've had a couple of those recently, which we'll get to later. But, I mean, it's just one of those things where you just accept, you lost the game, but it's one of the, like, in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot more important things that happened that weekend.
Yeah, and you think about I love that with the Winter Classic, the dress code for the coaches are a little different too. That's what I like about it, and the walk to the rink. And I know the sheet of ice isn't necessarily the best quality, of course, when you're building one for one event versus keeping one up for an 82 for a 41 game home schedule as well. So that's a little difficult as far as that. But as far as the future for the Vegas Golden Knights and them hosting an outdoor game, I know the Oakland Athletics have not moved to the region just yet, and I don't know all of the logistics of how the dimensions of what the ballpark is going to look like. Not going to lie, but as far as looking ahead and possible and the possibility, and I know there are elements with the dry heat as well out in Vegas. How much do you think? How much do you think of a consideration the NHL is going to take uh, a stadium series slash Winter Classic to Vegas, or are they going to put it at Allegiant Stadium where the Raiders play, even though they don't have a retractable roof?
Well, there is a retractable roof in Vegas for the A's when they come here, because it's just too hot to stay in the just too hot in general to watch a baseball game in the middle of the summer without a retractable roof. And there'd be day games, so there's a lot of logistical issues that they still got to figure out when it comes to the A's. As for when the Classic coming to Vegas, maybe, but the Lake Tahoe game is still fresh in so many people's minds that it's just really difficult for me to be sold on an idea that you're going to play a Winter Classic game in Vegas weather where it's so unpredictable in the winter. It's still cold enough to get here. It's still cold. I mean, don't get me wrong. It'll still be around 40 to 50 degrees, but the sun is the bigger issue. I don't think it's necessarily the temperature, but the sun. Because the sun could be out that day, and next thing you know, it's melting the ice, and you're having a 9 hour intermission delay. So it's
Yeah.
just truly one of those things where it really comes down to whether or not they can figure out the logistics of it, but I just don't see it happening right now. But who knows? I mean, never say never when it comes to sports.
Yeah, I remember that was during the 56 game season, and game was originally supposed to start at 3, and then you wait until midnight Eastern for that game between them and the Colorado Avalanche to resume play, and just I can only imagine how frustrating it was for the players and still trying to get loose and all, and still be able to play a hockey game after that as well. So, like you said, it's still very fresh for the organization as a whole. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about the identity that the Vegas Golden Knights have tried to continue into this season, even with their record being 4-6-0 in their last 10. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. And the NHL season can bring a whole bunch of possibilities, whether Sam Reinhart can score 50 goals. He's well on his way, along with his 7 power play goals. And I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like Sam Reinhart, Matthew Tkachuk, Connor McDavid, or Nathan McKinnon, if they will score more or less their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. Back on this Thursday, January 4th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Thursday, here with Paul Delos Santos of the Hockey News Las Vegas, here to discuss more about the Vegas Golden Knights and what's the latest that is with the team. And it's funny because the timing of this is actually really great as far as this conversation I want to have with you, Paul. And I was listening to NHL at the Rink yesterday, maybe like mid-afternoon, late afternoon. And Dan Rosen and Sean Rourke were talking about the latest with the Vegas Golden Knights. You have the Christmas break and all. They have an East Coast swing, that very last one, which, when it comes to body time and playing a hockey game, that's a strange time for them on an end of a trip going into Sunrise, Florida at 12 p.m. Pacific time for them and all. And, you're just trying, it's not trying to make excuses for the Golden Knights, but, you're just trying to make it back home for the holidays mentally. You're still trying to, and you're thinking about the Winter Classic of what's ahead. So 4-6-0. And now the latest is William Karlsson is out for the next 2 games, something that you wrote on the Hockey News and all. They haven't had Aiden Hill. They haven't had Shea Theodore for a bit and all. And one thing that Dan Rosen was talking about is he said that maybe the Vegas Golden Knights are the way he processes it is they're going through the motion. Of course, recently a Stanley Cup champion, and when you win, and not only when you win, but when you are in the dance and go into extended runs over and over again, sometimes times like late December and early January can feel it is the dog days of the NHL season. Sometimes you're still in the thick of it, but you're still not trying to be worried about everything and all. And let's not forget this. Yuri Patera was the goaltender for the Vegas Golden Knights in their most recent matchup against the Florida Panthers. And Vegas, injuries as far as goaltending, they have dealt with them before. This isn't new for them. So how are you viewing this latest stretch? Do you feel it as going through the motions? Because every statistical category, they're still in the upper third of the NHL in every statistical category.
Um, I think they're going through the motions, and I'm going to write something on the Hockey News about this. What my theory is, I really feel that they're tired because they played the second most games in the NHL compared to, like, I think only the Boston Bruins had more games at 39. They went into late June, and they're just playing. They're just playing hockey. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily like. I don't think they're necessarily like just like intentionally tanking. I think they're just more like going through the motions is a good way to put it. I think they're really just trying to get to that All-Star break where they get 2 weeks off. I think they're trying to get to that bye week and then the All-Star break, which will give them 2 weeks off to recover. And it was funny that everyone mentions this stretch. I mean, but last year they did the same thing. They did it was a very similar situation. They went 12-12-3 in 2022-23 to end, and they walked into the All-Star break limping in with a 4-game losing streak. So they're currently 7-6-1 in December and January. So they're roughly on par with what they did last year. And if you take what they did last year, everyone will take what happened in January and December if June is the same result.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, looking at it for this, not to get too much ahead of tonight's matchup, I mean, they're still 13-3-0 at home. I mean, still a great home record. I mean, and you think about what possible distractions there could be in Vegas and still with this type of record. I mean, plus 21 goal differential. And also, I got to give credit to Vegas as far as what they do as far as protecting their goaltenders. And I want to go deeper into to this as far as that their Corsi for percentage is at 48%, but their shots for is at 51%. So I'm like, okay, that means that there's probably a lot of shot blocking that's going on. And I looked up, Brayden McNabb has 109 blocks. Alex Petrangelo, 82 of them as well. And Jack Eichel leads all forwards in block shots as well. So they're really sticking to that identity as well. And to compare it to the Florida Panthers, Nico Mikkola is the top shot blocker on the Panthers with 63 and Forsling with 51. And also the Panthers learned a lot of lessons from the Stanley Cup final, especially when it comes to size with their bottom six as well, which they tried to do during the offseason as well. And also they have not given up shorthanded goals on the power play. They've only given up one from natural stat trick from what I've seen as well. So they're still continuing on that identity from the previous season as well. And and it's going to be difficult because you still got to replace William Karlsson. Chandler Stevenson looks to have had an increased role. I know he's in a contract year, so is Jonathan Marchessault as well. But as far as team identity, is it just status quo and continuing on from the previous season?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's the easiest way to put it. That they're pretty much the same identity. I think more. I think the analytics are slowly creeping back down to the mean a little bit in terms of what's going on, in terms of like some shots getting through and scoring on the goalies. Logan Thompson's seen an increased work rate without Aiden Hill, so I think that's also played into it. So there's a lot of factors going into this recent slump. I think the big one is just fatigue and just regression to the mean. I mean, they were so good statistically, and they were so good in the Stanley Cup playoffs that at some point, it's so good to start the season that at some point there's going to be a little bit of regression. I mean, so they'll regress. So, and it happens at the right time of year. If you want it to happen roughly around now. If you're going to regress a little bit, rather than have it regress in May or June. So it feels like the same identity. They're blocking shots. There's more shot. The shots that are getting through are going in, which is unfortunate for the Golden Knights, which is I think has really increased why they're 4-6-0 in their last 10. But also they're just not getting goals to go in for them. That's another issue, and that's another issue that's really been plaguing them a little bit is that they're kind of snake bitten in terms of getting their offense going. So there's a lot of like things they're gonna clean up, but they're a veteran team, as they'll say. They'll always say that they know they're not playing their best, so they'll work harder every time. And there's times when they were supposed to have a skate off, and they're like, no, we're calling practice because we're not playing well. And that happened early in the season. I think it's gonna happen soon. I think they're just trying to get to the break and kind of rest up and get everyone healthy again.
Yeah, and I heard an interview of Bruce Cassidy just talking about his experience with talking when he was in Boston, talking to a coach like Bill Belichick, and just how do you deal with rough stretches and all, and very good insight from what I heard from Bruce Cassidy as far as what he's carried over to Vegas, and Vegas is no stranger to trying to either trade assets to try to find a way to win, whether it was Zach Dean to get Ivan Barbashev, and then having to trade Riley Smith in order to get to keep Barbashev, and obviously getting younger, which has been very key. Of course, there was a trade for Marc-Andre Fleury when they extended Robin Lehner as well. But as far as keeping guys and all, mentioned Marchessault, the Conn Smythe winner, also a former Panther who was claimed, who was gotten from the expansion draft as well. Chandler Stevenson in the mix. But looking at the cap situation, it looks like that someone might, if you want to keep both of them, there might be another trade coming in the offseason as well. And the one contract that looks movable looks to be Nicholas Waugh, if anything. Do you think that if it's not him, do you think it's do you think it's someone else on the roster in order to keep both of them?
That's a tough question. I think to keep both of them, the salary cap's going up,
Hmm.
and that's the biggest thing that helps Vegas. I think, truthfully, if you were to ask me, it'd probably be a defenseman more so because they're so deep at that position overall. So I don't know which defenseman. I mean, Alex Martinez is in a contract year, so it could be him, but he's 30, 36. So he's 36,
Hmm.
37. So he might be on his last legs anyway. So truthfully, if they're going to move away from a player, it'd probably be a defenseman just because their depth is just so good at that position. But at the same time, they've been really good about knowing when to step away from a player and step. I mean, outside of Riley Smith and Marc Andre Fleury, they basically haven't really lost the deal.
Hmm.
So it's one of those tricky situations where um, I just don't know. Maybe there's a hometown discount for some player, like taking less than market value, but I don't know. It's gonna be tough to keep all the players, but you never know. I mean, maybe the salary cap works out. Maybe Marshall takes less than market value, which who knows? I mean, I don't know. I'm not in a negotiating room with them, so it's just
Yeah.
one of those things where I don't think Marshall would want less than market value, but I also don't think he wants to leave Vegas. So
Yeah.
it's really one of those. It's one of those catch-22s that we're in um that we're gonna see. It's gonna be a very interesting offseason because the team's gonna look very different from what it is now. So sorry, my camera just went out.
Yeah, yeah, no worries, as far I can still hear you, but, uh, with Jonathan Marchessault and getting off the expansion draft and all, and then being a hero in Vegas for many generations and all, it'll be great for them. If he wants to stay, I mean, the Florida Panthers are in that similar situation as far as Sam Reinhart, Brandon Montour, and Gustav Forsling as well when it comes to that. So so similar situations as far as teams up against the cap and all. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3. We're going to discuss more about tonight's matchup and the Florida Panthers heading into Vegas for the first time since Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays and more. And with the Week 18 slate happening in the NFL, you might want to place your last-minute bets, especially with the Miami Dolphins going for that number 2 seed in the AFC and the AFC East title as they face the Buffalo Bills this Sunday night. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Third and final segment here on this Thursday, January 4th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Thursday. And Florida Panthers, Vegas Golden Knights tonight from the Fortress, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I once again, I got Paul Delos Santos here from the Hockey News Las Vegas here on the show to discuss more about tonight's matchup. And like we spoke a little bit about just earlier, the last game of the trip for the Vegas Golden Knights, the last go round, a 4-2 victory for the Florida Panthers. I mean, you think about the first, and the Panthers are on a little bit of a run right now, where the last 291 minutes and 2 seconds they haven't trailed. And the last time was when Mark Stone scored to make it 1-0 Vegas back on December 23rd. And even in that game, the Florida Panthers as far as shots on goal, it was 20-3 after the first period. So it even goes back to as far as the dominant play, even before they had that deficit, 8:58 into the first, into the second, excuse me. But for the Panthers and the Golden Knights, it's obvious. This game, as far as this regular season game, means more for the Panthers than it does the Golden Knights. I mean, you're the ones that lost the championship. This is the building that, even though Matthew Tkachuk didn't play, you gave up 9 goals on the night, and it felt like the goals were never going to stop. And then you see Mark Stone getting the hat trick, which he fractured his hand in that same game in Game 5. Crazy to think with that. But as far as tonight's matchup, for the Golden Knights, yeah, we discussed no William Karlsson, and the lines are going to be little juggled for Vegas. I mean, William Karlsson has been durable this season as well. So now who on that bottom 6 do you think is going to need to step up the most for in place of Wild Bill?
Everyone. I mean, it's just you can't replace such a dynamic two-way player like William Karlsson. It's just hard, especially when you got inexperienced Paul Cotter and Pavel Dorofeyev going to be on the wings of Michael Mario. Then you got the fourth line, which isn't known for its offense, but can get those greasy goals that really are valuable. So it's going to take someone. It's going to take if I had to pick one, it'd have to be Nicholas Waugh. He's got the most dynamic skill set of the 6, and then Paul Cotter and Pavel Dorofeyev. Those are the 3 guys that I say have to step up and go beyond their natural projections and go beyond what their skill sets are in order to kind of replace. Now, Bruce Cassidy has said he's not expecting anyone to step in and be that guy, be the same guy, but he needs someone to step up their production and what they do well. So it's going to be interesting to see how that third line plays, especially with Amadio moving from the wing to center, and then with him having Dorofeev and Paul Cotter to his wings. I mean, Paul Cotter is extremely dynamic in those one-on-one situations. He's a good, heavy forechecker, very inconsistent offensively, but he's very confident in his abilities. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that he's grown in the past year. And I think that's the biggest thing I could walk away from, is saying that Paul Cotter is better this year than he was last year. And I think he will need to step up his game a little bit without Carlson, and he'll have to do more individually. And I think that's something that is either a good thing or a bad thing when you're talking about Paul Cotter.
Yeah, and and it's hard to replace someone like who's also a Swiss Army knife, no pun intended, for William Karlsson, as far as a guy who's also gone up on the top line at times this season. A little bit of a Florida Panthers update is Nick Cousins is in concussion protocol after taking that hit from Jason Zucker on Tuesday, and Jason Zucker has been suspended for the next 3 games for the Arizona Coyotes. So Jonah Gadjovich is going to draw into the 4th line, and Ryan Lomberg will be placed on that 3rd line tonight with Anton Lundell and Eetu Luostarinen there as well for the Florida Panthers. So that is as far as the roster updates. Nothing yet. The Vegas Golden Knights will take the ice at 1 p.m. for their morning skate, 1 p.m. Eastern, and the Panthers will hit the ice at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for their morning skate, and we'll know more of updates on who the starting goaltenders are for the Florida Panthers there. But we are expecting Sergei Bobrovsky there as far as that. And here's the thing. Paul Murray spoke about yesterday during their practice in Vegas, and here's the practice rotation for the Panthers. And I don't know if I agree with how the Panthers are doing this, because they do have a game after in Colorado on a matinee. They practiced yesterday in Vegas, game, and then they practice tomorrow in Vegas. So they're staying in the area, and then they'll play in Colorado. Which if I had it my way, get to Colorado before so you can get to the altitude. So, and one less night in Vegas, which means one less night of distractions too. But also the fact that the Florida Panthers are hitting the ice and it's not a day off while you're in Vegas. It's a good opportunity for accountability for the Panthers as well, as far as that. But here are some. Paul Murray spoke about the 5 foundational components of the Panthers. They're getting strong special teams. They've gone to the box. Their opponents have gone to the box 9 more times than the Panthers have in their 5-game winning streak. Their power play is at 30% in the last 5 as well. They stopped the top 2 power play units in the New York Rangers and the Tampa Bay Lightning during that winning streak as well. And their goals against are under 2. So key components for the Florida Panthers as they have gotten through 5 games. And you spoke about the stretch for the Vegas Golden Knights currently. The Panthers, on their most recent West Coast swing, Western Canada and Seattle, they only have 4 points out of 10. So even though the Panthers didn't win the cup, but because they have been through quite a few playoff runs now, I feel from the Florida Panthers at that time, it was them going through the motions, and now they found their groove. This is a big swing for both teams. The Panthers could continue their win streak, or the Vegas Golden Knights to break their slump. But when you look at that number, Paul, 0-8 in their history. The only season where they didn't play each other was the 56-game season where we had the pods of divisions. How are you seeing this one? How are you viewing this one tonight from your perspective?
You just have 2 teams that are on opposite ends of how to play right now, so that's an interesting matchup in itself. As you mentioned, Florida does not play well in this building. Which but at some point that gives, and some, like Vegas's history, at some point they're just gonna break through and everything else. As for who's gonna probably walk away, it's Vegas tends to elevate in these types of games. They tend to get up for these types of games, and especially they don't lose 2 in a row too often. So gut says Vegas, but we'll see. I mean, I don't I it's hard to predict in the NHL regular season who's going to show up on every day. So it's just one of those things where it's, I feel Vegas is going to come out in this game and kind of establish dominance, and I think they tend to do that. Like, look at the Vancouver game. I think that's a good example of, like, they weren't playing their best in Edmonton and Calgary, but they show up in Vancouver and they thump Vancouver, who's leading the Pacific. So Vegas tends to get up for these types of matchups, and it's very interesting to see what they'll do tonight.
Yeah, and really helps that when it's against a team that is you're racing for in the division, which the Vegas Golden Knights are currently 2 points back from the Vancouver Canucks, and I think we could put that whole PDO argument with the Vancouver Canucks to rest when it comes to it. And you see their goal differential, it's legit. So I think that's an argument that we can put on the side as far as the Vancouver Canucks, as far as puck luck going for them as well. And they're getting everything as far as going in. They're getting the goaltending as well. And with the latest rumors about William Nylander in Toronto, does that say, is that an indication of what Elias Pettersson could be making in his next contract? Who knows? So, but they're definitely on the right track, and it's going to be a fun division. I'm sure for you to watch, as well as Stanley Cup champion and a team with a load of talent, but has had so much untapped potential over the last few years, and now they got the coaching too, so which helps as well. So, Paul, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, previewing tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Golden Knights. Tell everybody where they can follow you and your work online.
You can follow me on the hockey news at thn.com/Vegas. You can follow me on X or Twitter, whatever you call it these days. I mean, I still call it Twitter, at Paul Delos _. And you can also read my recaps on NHL.com, as I'm the independent contributor for Vegas home games.
Awesome, Paul. Thank you so much, and hope to talk to you soon, my friend.
I'll talk to you soon.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Paul Delos Santos, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.